Hello, Shiver Seekers. Are you ready to follow us into the unknown? I'm Cynthia.
And I'm Stephanie. You have found the Dark Oak.
And today we're going to be discussing the provocative death of Mica Miller and the media firestorm that followed.
Welcome to the Dark Oak, the mystery podcast with purpose. Each month through our charity, the Branch of Hope Foundation, we give a portion of all of our proceeds from our Patreons and our sponsors to a nonprofit organization related to the first episode of the month. And guys, that's today. So we're going to present to you a nonprofit organization that we are going to support and love on through the entire month of November 2024. So stay tuned to the end of the episode to get more information on that. But, we've got to get to it, Cynthia. Okay, we have to talk about Oktoberfest and how much fun we had first.
We just finished our 2024 second annual Oktoberfest.
I know, it does seem a little weird to not be like, it's the Dark Oak and Oktoberfest.
I know, no campfire stories.
No crickets.
No crickets this episode. But yeah, it was such a great month. It was a nice mental break for me. I know personally we focused on some of the more mysterious, spooky. They were all still true crime and nature. All of our episodes. But, we took it back a little bit. I talked about the life and death of Edgar Allan Poe and
Bella and the Witch Elm.
Right. It was a nice little spooky break.
They're all mysteries.
All mysteries. But today we're bringing it back to our roots. It's really true crimey today.
What about Mica Miller?
Oh.
We had already decided this is what we wanted to cover coming out, of Oktoberfest. And then 3 days ago, my social media started blowing up because now they're doing more searches on her husband's house. You've got to catch me up to speed.
Okay. So this is one where we will almost definitely have an update as more news comes out, because yes, there's some updates that I'll talk to you about at the very end, happening right now. But yes, this case is not over and we still have a lot of unanswered questions. So let me catch you up in case you are not familiar with Mica Miller, which probably most of our listeners are. But here I've got all the information for you compiled into one episode where you can really familiarize yourself with this case. And
I wanted to kind of know the bullet points, especially because it's like a moving target now. I want to know everything that's out there so then I can know what to look for moving forward.
Sure.
Because this is, really, we didn't expect all of a sudden there to be more movement.
Yeah, no, literally, I pretty much finalized my script and Stephanie sent me a news article saying that the FBI was raiding a home. So let's get into it and I'll give you all the details.
Sorry, I know I keep interrupting you.
On April 27th, 2024, 30-year-old South Carolina woman, Mica Miller, placed a disturbing 911 call. In this call, she asked the dispatcher if they were able to track her location from her phone. The dispatcher works on it for a few moments, trying to locate the phone before finally asking what's going on. And in response, the dispatcher heard Mica say, quote, "I'm about to kill myself, and I just want my family to know where to find me," end quote. After a few moments, the call was disconnected. The dispatcher attempted to call Mica back several times, but the phone was never answered. Hours later, Mica's body was found deep in Lumber River State Park in North Carolina. At first glance, Mica's death sounds like a tragic suicide. However, in the days, weeks, and months since her death, many dark secrets have surfaced, and despite her fatal gunshot to the head being ruled self-inflicted, many of us are still asking who is actually responsible for Mica Miller's death. You see, as officials probed into the events surrounding Mica's death, we learned that she was in the middle of a very nasty divorce with her husband, Pastor John Paul Miller. When Mica's family, specifically her sister Sierra, learned of Mica's death, she immediately became very vocal, saying that it was John Paul Miller who was responsible. Sierra went as far as to say that Mica had previously told her and other family members that, quote, "If I end up with a bullet in my head, it was not by me, it was JP," end quote.
This is all so tragic. Every single piece of what you've talked about, that phone call that she made, the fact that they found her alone, the fact that this was a self-inflicted gunshot wound, the fact that she was in such turmoil before it happened, all just really tragic.
This is a very, very tragic case. I will say, and Stephanie is aware, I really struggled in my research and writing with this one. It is so heavy. It's so, so heavy. There's so much sadness and just tragedy, really, surrounding Mica's last days. So, just be prepared. It's not going to get easier.
When I was going to say, I was like, I feel like there should almost be truly a trigger warning for this entire episode for domestic abuse, for domestic violence, for suicide, suicidal ideations, suicidal tendencies. This is rough.
This is a rough, really, really sad case. And there's no getting around it. It's a rough one. Now, J.P. Miller has not remained silent in the wake of his estranged wife's death, telling a news station that Mica struggled with her mental health and that he had arguments with her family about Mica's need to take medication because, according to J.P., Mica had struggled with suicidal ideation for years.
Okay.
I watched an interview that J.P. Miller gave to News Nation where he said that as long as Mica was with him, he kept her on medications and she was fine. But since their separation, she'd been with her family, and her family did not ensure that she stayed on medication, and therefore they allowed her to become suicidal. In this interview, JP said that he'd seen Mica in the weeks before her death, and during this time, she was in and out of psychosis. But according to JP, she told him that she wanted to come home to him, but was afraid of her family's anger and backlash. He also implied that the allegations of abuse and control Mica made against him previously were made during these bouts of psychosis. Okay, so that's an overview of this case. So now I'm going to dive in and give you some details so you can decide for yourself what you think happened here, why we are in this place where we find ourselves now. Mica Miller was born on March 7th, 1994 in Wichita, Kansas, to her parents Michael and Angelita. She was raised in Wichita with her 5 siblings, but moved to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina with her mother and stepfather when Mica was 14. Once in Myrtle Beach, they joined a church called Solid Rock. And this is where Mica met her future husband, John Paul Miller, when she was a student in the church youth group that he led.
Oh, what was their age difference?
John Paul, or JP, is 15 years Mica's senior.
Oh my gosh, I didn't realize it was that spread out.
Yes.
Now, a student, so I'm taking it meant she was still like a teenager?
So she was 14 when they moved to Myrtle Beach and started going to this church.
Okay, so they didn't necessarily start dating at this point, but that's where she met him.
That's where she met him.
Okay, got it.
She met him. He was the leader of the youth group where she was a student.
Okay, got it.
And because he was older, JP was actually married to his first wife, Allison, at the time that he met Mica. And he shares 4 children with Allison, and then he had another child from a previous relationship prior to that. So he had 5 children already.
Okay, and I'm doing the math, he was like 29.
29. And the 4 children he had with Allison were throughout his marriage. So he may not have had 4 upon meeting Mica.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it.
By the end of his relationship with Allison, he had 4 children with her.
Okay.
And 1 from a previous relationship.
So he at least had a few children up in there. Okay.
In 2012, when Mica was 18 years old, she married another church member, JP's best friend and his right-hand man, Jeremy Diaz. Mica and Jeremy were both involved in the church, with Jeremy in charge of the sports ministry and Mica working on the media team. Eventually, Mica became JP's secretary and the babysitter for his and Allison's kids. But this arrangement got messy when in 2015, Allison discovered JP and Mica in a sexually compromising position.
Oh, Wait, so a leader in the church was basically having an affair
with
his
a leader in the
babysitter.
church. Yes.
Yes. Okay, great.
Both were leaders in the church.
Okay, good.
And upon being discovered, the affair quickly became public knowledge, and shortly after, both JP's and Mica's marriages ended in divorce.
Yeah, I could see that.
Mica and JP would end up marrying in 2017 when Mica was 23 and JP was 38. And ultimately, John Paul Miller became the senior pastor of Solid Rock Church in Myrtle Beach. So he's now the head of the entire congregation.
The irony of Solid Rock is, not lost on me.
Yeah, we're gonna have some moments.
I don't know that this is a solid foundation.
Well, put your seatbelt on, girl, because nothing about this is gonna be not rocky.
Yeah, it's kind of wild that the congregation of the church was like, yeah, we're good with this. Okay.
Now, no one really knows what happens behind closed doors in a marriage, but I'm going to give you a timeline leading up to Mica's death of things that we do know that happened. So in November 2022, before Mica and JP separated, there was a text exchange. And I wanted to share this particular exchange because I think it's a good example of how disagreements in this relationship were handled, and it reflects how JP and Mica communicated.
Sure. Yeah, it seems already just because of some of their maybe life experience. And again, 15 years, it's not necessarily the 15 years. It's just the different phases of life.
Well, she's 23 years old.
And got married at 18. So she's never really lived on her own. She doesn't have a ton of life experience. And here's this guy in his 30s.
Late 30s. He's 38 with 5 kids.
That's just a huge difference in just life experience, you know?
Correct.
At this stage in life, the difference between an early 20-year-old and a late 30-year-old, that's huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
Very big. Very big. On November 16th, 2022, JP and Mica got into an argument. And things got so heated that Mica left the house to go to her sister's house to get a break.
Okay.
While she was at her sister's, JP sent Mica texts saying things like, "If you leave me, you are an ungodly wife," or "Everything you have done is completely unacceptable, but I'm willing to take you back this one time." He sent her messages saying that she needed to repent for her behavior. He sent her a text saying that if she was not home by 9 a.m. the next morning, everything she ever owned would be dropped off at Goodwill.
Oh, wow, that's extreme. And as we know, every heated argument is only one-sided. There are never two sides. There are never two people participating in that argument. It's not like he's apologizing or acknowledging any part that he had in the argument. You know what I'm saying? It takes two people to argue, and I don't see him taking any ownership on his part.
And I've just brought you the highlights of these texts. I've actually read the entire text exchange. She was barely even responding.
Wow.
Like she literally responded a couple of times, like when she almost felt like she had to, like when he's saying, "I'm going to put all your stuff's going to Goodwill."
Yeah, that's extreme.
Right. And to that text, she responded saying, "Hey, I just went to visit Sierra. I just went to go see my sister." To which JP responded saying that he was coming to her sister's house and that when he got there, he will raise hell. He named the occupants of the house by name and said they will all be up all night. JP then texted Sierra, Mica's sister, saying he was armed and headed to her house.
Okay, well, that escalated very quickly. At least it seemed to. Wow.
Mica then texted JP saying, "Do not come to the house, especially threatening with a gun."
Yeah, like, boy, if there's anything that's going to make me want to return home, it's you threatening me with a firearm.
That wouldn't do it for you, Steph?
No, weird, but no.
Mica reminded JP that there were children at this house, and he responded by saying, quote, "I didn't say it was a gun," end quote.
What the heck?
He's just...
Right. I mean, is this like the definition of like gaslighting? Like, I just told you this thing, but now I'm going to make you sound like the crazy person?
Right. He continues to threaten that everyone in the home will be awake all night. And ultimately, this exchange led to Sierra having to call the police.
Yeah, as she should have. Good for her.
Right. At another point, during one of their many other arguments, JP posted a topless photo of Mica online.
No, he did not.
He did, Stephanie. He did. The pastor of a church.
For what reason? I mean, not that there's anything that would excuse that, but how could he think that was okay?
Well, he wrote an apology.
Like, was it an accident?
No, Stephanie, it was not an accident.
I don't know. I'm just saying, like, that's so outrageous.
Well, in his apology email, he wrote, quote, "I'm sorry for putting a picture of you on the internet. It was for less than 1 hour and immediately taken down. I was hurt that you were telling everyone horrible, intimate details of my past sin, and I just wanted to try and hurt you. Please forgive me. It was evil of me to do that." End quote. And I'll be honest, this is the only apology I've ever seen from him. It was a horrible one because he's literally saying, it was only an hour. I took it right down.
And basically, you made me do it.
Right.
He should also be offering like a public apology to everyone who saw it. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's outrageous. Like, apologizing to his congregation, apologizing to a lot more than just her.
When I read this, I literally put myself in her shoes for a second, and I thought, if my husband, under any circumstances, did something like that to me, something just purely for no other reason than to hurt and humiliate and destroy
Which he
me.
fully admitted to.
Right.
He fully admitted, I did this just to hurt you.
It would be, there would never be any going back from that.
No, I'd be like, he's vindictive. Like, if he could do that, where do you go next?
Yeah,
And
I mean,
all
I
I
have
can
no
think
words.
is Mica was in, at this point, you know, she felt too deep, maybe. But this is really bad.
It's terrible. It's terrible. And in January of 2024, JP and Mica formally separated.
Thank goodness.
Well, a month later, on February 8th, 2024, Mica was involuntarily hospitalized for 48 hours. And when she was discharged from the hospital, she was informed that John Paul had picked up her purse and her car keys. And when she returned to the parking lot where she'd left her vehicle, it was gone. Mica filed a police report saying that she believed John Paul fraudulently initiated her involuntary hospitalization and stole her 2019 white Honda Accord while she was receiving treatment. And
so he said, like, so she thinks basically he said she's a danger to herself and had her picked up.
Yep. And hospitalized. And then while she's in the hospital, he, according to her, steals her car. And because
if this is true, that is wild.
They are separated at this point. So,
and he's angry.
He's angry. So this isn't, you know, oh, I'm in the hospital, so my husband picked up my car, so it didn't get towed. This is, you know, him going and he's just messing with her. He's just messing with her.
Well, and if they're separated too, I mean, what would be his basis to think that he would know whether she needs to be hospitalized or not? Wow.
He's just, girl, it doesn't get any better. It does not. The situation is not going to get better.
Poor Mica, because this is wild.
Yeah. It was during that interaction with police when she's reporting that her husband stole her vehicle and had her involuntary hospitalized.
Good grief.
It was then she told the law enforcement officer that her husband had begun grooming her when she was still a child, which isn't hard to believe if she was 14.
Well, he's a leader of the youth. Yeah, leader of the youth group. I can see how that happens.
Ultimately, since the car was considered marital property and the two were still legally married, no charges were filed. At about 1:20 a.m., about a month later, on March 11th, Mica Miller contacted the police to report that one of her tires had been slashed. When police arrived to her home, she told them this was the second time a razor had deflated her tire in the last week.
And so not an accident. You don't run over a nail twice like that.
Well, it wasn't an accident because when the officers removed the metal piece, it was found that it was a tire deflation device.
What?
That can be purchased online.
I didn't even know those existed.
Oh, neither did I, but now I do.
Because why would you need that ever unless you're planning to destroy someone's property?
Yeah, I don't. I mean,
a literal tire deflation device
that can be easily purchased online. And Mica named the person she believed to be responsible for this.
Oh, who was it?
Well, here's the thing. The suspect's name has been redacted in the police report. So in several of these reports, the suspect's name have been redacted, but we all know who it was.
Yes.
Police said there was not enough evidence to charge anyone in the tire slashing incident.
Which is probably true.
Later that day, a Horry County police officer met Mica at East Coast Honda to investigate a harassment complaint. She told him that the first officer she'd met that day had helped change her tire and that she'd headed to a gas station before going to East Coast Honda to get the tire fixed. And according to this police report, when she was at the gas station getting fuel, the suspect showed up next to her at the pump trying to talk to her.
The quote, suspect.
The suspect. She told him to go away and said she did not want to talk, and when she pulled her phone out to record him, he sped off. While Mica was talking to the officer at the dealership, she received a call from the suspect from a blocked number. The suspect was advised that the victim did not want any further contact, and if he continued to keep calling her, warrants could possibly be written up.
So he called while she's standing in front of a police officer.
While she's talking to the police.
So this is not made up. She's not exaggerating anything. These are proven. I mean, you can't prove the tire slashing, fine, the tire deflation, but he's clearly calling from a block number to harass her.
Correct.
And has been informed by Mica and law enforcement, do not contact her anymore.
Correct.
Okay.
Mica told the police officer she was afraid for her life and that she blocks his numbers and still gets calls and texts from him on other numbers. After the officer left the dealership, the mechanics working on Mica's car found a tracking device on her car.
Oh, that's so scary.
Like, this person is a psychopath.
Like, that's like next level.
This is like a movie where we're like, okay, you're like, going too far.
Yep, you went too far. Who has a tracking device? But then again, who goes online and buys a tire deflating device?
Stephanie, it's like a movie. It's like a movie.
Yeah, and we don't throw around things like psychopath and stuff very lightly here. Like, we don't go around. But this guy, there is something not right.
Okay, and
I wasn't.
I'm not a doctor, so I can't say.
No,
but this is psychopath behavior.
No, this is really, he's disturbed.
This is bunny boiling behavior.
Yeah, he's disturbed.
After leaving the dealership, Mica, of course, went straight to the courthouse to try to get a restraining order. So in one day, she wakes up to a slashed tire. Then she's stalked everywhere she goes that day. Then she finds out her car is being tracked, and she has to end the day filing for a restraining order. I mean, what a day.
Yeah, challenging, to say the least.
To say the least. Police met Mica at the courthouse to pick up the GPS device, and while standing in front of the courthouse with Mica, the officer reported seeing a white in color Honda Accord slow roll in front of the magistrate's office. And according to the police report, the vehicle sped up and drove off.
So here's the deal. All right, you've got the piece of paper saying he's not supposed to come near you. That doesn't do anything to protect you.
Except tick him off.
Right.
Well, and I don't think she actually got the restraining order. Okay. We'll find out later more about her request for a restraining order. But she went and attempted to get it.
But even if you do, for a man like this, that means nothing.
No, it literally just ticks him off. And we already know that the most dangerous time for a person in an abusive relationship is when they choose to leave.
That's right.
That's the most dangerous time, because now you have really upset your abuser.
Yes.
2 days later, someone from Solid Rock Church filed a police report alleging that Mica transferred nearly $1,200 in donation funds from the church's Zelle and Cash App accounts to her personal bank account. Police later said there was insufficient evidence to pursue charges. So, I don't know.
Some anonymous person. Who knows?
But now we're trying to get her in legal trouble. On March 22nd, Mica Miller posted a video on Facebook offering advice to anyone who may be in an abusive relationship, saying, quote, God hates divorce, but why? According to everybody I've asked and the scriptures I've found, it's because it hurts people. But does abuse hurt people? How do you think God feels about that? End quote. On March 26, approximately 1 month before Mica's death, a bench trial was held in the case of Mica Miller versus John Paul Miller as a civil case in which Mica sought this restraining order.
Sure.
The case was dismissed without prejudice and no restraining order was issued.
Huh. Okay, I wonder what led to that. It seems pretty cut and dried to me, but all right.
At 12:12 p.m. on April 27th, the day of Mica's death, surveillance footage shows Mica walking into Dick's pawn shop in Myrtle Beach, where she is seen purchasing a weapon and ammunition. And I will say, this video is pretty creepy because if you didn't know what she was doing, you would think she was waiting in line at Disney World. She is smiling. She is happy. She looks totally unaffected. Like she is, I mean, there's a picture of her looking beautiful, just smiling.
Wow.
About an hour after leaving the pawn shop at 1:35 p.m., Mica is seen leaving a convenience store after purchasing a drink and gas. And at 2:54 p.m., Mica made that infamous 911 call. 9 minutes after the call, Robeson County deputies were dispatched to the Lumber River State Park for a welfare check and an attempt to locate Mica. They requested to have Mica's phone pinged, and they arrived at the park at 3:31 to begin the search along with state park rangers. An unmanned aerial vehicle, or drone, was dispatched in an effort to locate her. While performing the aerial search, detectives were approached by a person who said he found a bag while fishing, and this bag contained Mica's ID. This witness also reported hearing a person crying and whimpering, and then he heard a gunshot.
Oh, that's rough.
After about an hour of searching, another individual contacted Robeson County 911 and said that while he had been fishing on his kayak, he located a body in the water, and it was Mica Miller.
Oh, gosh.
Investigators located a Sig Sauer gun case in the passenger seat of Mica's vehicle there at the park and a box of ammunition in the center console. They also found a receipt for the handgun from a pawn shop and a receipt from a convenience store. Both receipts were dated for the same day of Mica's death, lining up with what would later be seen on the surveillance footage.
Right.
Later that evening, the firearm was located in the water, and the serial number on the weapon matched the gun box that was found in Mica's Honda Accord.
So, based on the receipts, based on the video surveillance, based on the phone call, based on the evidence, I see why they labeled this as a suicide.
Yes. Well, and personally, I believe it was a suicide. Now, part of why we're talking about this case is because after this happened and news broke about this, and then, these little bits of information about the state of their marriage and JP's behavior caused some people to think there's no way this was suicide. I personally believe it was. The motivation is what I question.
Well, right. And there have been a lot of discussion about this, like bullying, for instance. So you can be held liable for bullying someone into committing suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen it a lot with teenagers, which is absolutely devastating. But you need to be held responsible for that. And so I think that's why there is this extra look into what led to Mica doing this.
Well, and some people, because the 911 call was not made public knowledge immediately. And I remember seeing on my own social media friends saying, he killed her. There's no way. There's no way. There's no way. And I remember being like, in my mind, like, well, I heard the phone call. So I don't think he killed her unless maybe he's standing or someone is standing there threatening her saying, if you don't make this call, then we're going to hurt you.
Right.
I think that personally is
so she's the one that carried it out, but what was her motivation behind it?
Right. Especially in the weeks right after her murder, a lot of people believed she was not even the one to carry it out.
Well, I do remember that.
Right.
People thinking that somehow he was responsible.
Right.
And he may have been, but for a different reason than
Right.
pulling the trigger.
In a different manner.
Correct.
What didn't help bring clarity, I guess, in the beginning was the fact that there was no autopsy or toxicology report done. Authorities did not test for gunshot residue on Mica Miller. Her body was released to JP despite their tumultuous relationship and the protection order requests.
Oh, I don't like that, especially because the police department saw firsthand that he was harassing her. So I feel like somebody really made a mistake there.
Somebody made a mistake there. I agree. And ultimately, Mica was cremated. So if we do have any questions about, forensic evidence and tests maybe that weren't done immediately, there's nothing we can do about it now.
Well, based on what you've just told me, I don't disagree that she was ultimately the one, that carried out the act. The question is, what led her to do it?
Sure. And that's where I landed on this. But I don't know that that's where everybody is. Some people still think JP is somehow responsible. Well, despite he was actually out of state. He was actually out of town, and he does have an alibi, and he does have many witnesses. He was actually not in town. He was in Charleston at the time of Mica's death.
Well, he's a vile human being.
Correct.
He made himself a pretty good villain. I mean, he made himself into, I'm not going to say a likable villain, but an infamous villain. I mean, he's an easy one to not like, and he's an easy one to point fingers at.
He is, and you'll probably dislike him even more when I tell you that 4 days after Mica's death, J.P. Miller was seen eating sushi and drinking at a restaurant with a woman named Susie Skinner, a woman he was allegedly having an affair with since 2021. And we will talk about Susie a little bit more a little later on in this episode.
Yeah, I was going to say, we already know he's vile. What's her excuse?
I don't know. We'll talk about her in a few minutes.
Oh, boy.
In the days after Mica's death, leaders at Solid Rock Church filed a police report with concerns about an influx of harassing messages in the wake of Mica's death.
Honestly, I'm surprised they hadn't been coming in sooner.
Girl, me too. And as we've already discussed, this is because, people started thinking, what? There's more going on to this story here.
Well, yes. I mean, if anything's going to raise a red flag, it's probably this.
You're right. In response, John Paul sat down with a news station on May 2nd for an interview. And during this interview, JP talked about how mental health had always been a struggle for Mica and that she had struggled with suicidal ideations throughout their marriage. And on this same day, Mica's sister Sierra applied to be the special administrator of Mica's estate. In her affidavit, Sierra claimed that Mica had experienced abuse and violence from her husband, John Paul. On May 3rd, a probate court in Horry County named Sierra Francis special administrator of Mica's estate, and Mica's family began to dispute the manner of death described by John Paul. 2 days later, the overseer of Solid Rock Church in Market Common sent a notice to its members that Pastor John Paul Miller was released from all ministerial functions. The notice stated that Miller was released for a time of healing, counsel, and guidance pursuant to their governing instrument.
Yeah, I bet he was.
A week after Mica's death, John Paul Miller held a memorial service at Solid Rock Church, while at the same time, her family hosted a separate celebration of life in North Myrtle Beach. During the eulogy that JP gave for Mica, he said that he had visited Mica at the morgue at least 4 times that week, and that he'd even tried to raise her from the dead. He went on to say that after attempting to raise her from the dead, he visited a mall and thought he saw Mica, but it ended up being her sister, and for a moment he thought he actually had raised her from the dead.
This is all very disturbing.
I can actually, in deep grief, if somebody I loved was there, and I thought for a second I could change it. For me, that could be maybe described away as just deep grief, and you're so helpless and hopeless, you just want to do anything you can.
I feel like it's dramatics. For me, that feels like just dramatic stuff.
And I can coming from him, I don't know.
Coming from him.
I mean, I even remember John Benet Ramsey's mother, Patsy Ramsey, at the crime scene was heard saying, "Jesus, you raised Lazarus from the dead. Do it for my daughter."
Okay.
To me, that's just grief. Now, some people think that Patsy Ramsey had something to do with John Benet's death,
Right.
but for me, in those moments of grief, I mean, you don't even necessarily know what you're saying. For me, I can see that. What stuck out to me was the fact that he just happened to run into his sister-in-law at the mall.
And this is a man who we know is a full-blown stalker.
Right.
No,
For
that's what I'm
me,
saying. That's disturbing.
yeah, I was just like, did you really just happen to run into her?
Like, if I was Sierra, I'd be like, stay the hell away from me.
Well, and I don't know that it was Sierra. It was one of her sisters.
Okay, well, whatever sister, I'd be like, stay as far away from me as possible.
Of course. On May 6th, the medical examiner released Mica's cause of death, concluding she died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And Dr. Richard Johnson, the Robeson County medical examiner, said, quote, "It was not in the back of the head as it has been speculated," end quote. Because though that was the official, a couple of weeks after her death, that was the first time the cause of death and the manner of death were officially released. But of course, rumors were already going around.
Well, of course, a suicide in the back of the head would be unlikely.
Sure.
So I see that could have led to certainly more speculation that someone else was there
Right.
when she lost her life. But obviously that doesn't appear to be the case.
Right. Now, I will say I did in my research see people saying, well, why was John Paul talking about how she took her own life if that hadn't been announced yet? But of course, when he is notified, he's going to be given some information. And so I don't think the fact that he knew that she took her own life, I don't think that's guilt knowledge. But some people do. On May 10th, John Paul Miller filed a petition for formal appointment to be the fiduciary of the estate of Mica Miller. So now we have the two
I bet he did.
sides kind of fighting. Mid-May, the Robeson County Sheriff's Office released a statement that reads, "The Robeson County Sheriff's Office has been in contact with the United States Attorney's Office and the Federal Bureau of Investigation in South Carolina since the early stages of the Mica Miller investigation. Based on the information gathered during the investigation and jurisdiction reasons, the Sheriff's Office has requested the assistance of both agencies. No other information will be released at this time. Anyone with information pertaining to the Miller investigation in South Carolina is asked to contact the Columbia, South Carolina FBI office." I find that interesting that a week after the medical examiner has determined this to be a suicide by gunshot, they're still getting the FBI involved, which, as we know, as of less than a week ago, the FBI are doing raids. So there's something more going on that has not been released to the public.
Yeah.
Don't know what it is yet, but
well, maybe that's what's happening right now.
That's what I mean. I mean, they'd already ruled this a suicide, and yet,
yeah, what shady stuff?
Why is
he
the
involved
FBI
in?
getting involved?
Yeah.
As I already mentioned several times, and as you probably remember from living through this, when the details of JP and Mica's relationship came to light, in addition to JP's strange behavior after her death, people had opinions. But those opinions were not just shared between true crime podcast hosts and their listeners. Even people close to JP had quite a few things to say. And one example of this was a 68-year-old man named Bernard Kennerson, who worked in leadership at Solid Rock, but decided to separate from the church because he was troubled by Mica's death and by John Paul's demeanor in the days that followed. Kennerson said he got a phone call from John Paul's assistant at about 11:15 p.m. on the night Mica died, saying that Mica had passed away, and so he would need to get a message together for the next morning because it was a Saturday night when she passed and they had services the next morning.
Okay.
Less than 10 minutes later, he received a text message saying that John Paul planned to take the pulpit the next day. Bernard said he didn't think that was a good idea, but he wasn't necessarily surprised. Now, as reports of John Paul's abusive behavior began to circulate the media, Bernard Kennerson said he was appalled. Kennerson said John Paul kept a thick notebook documenting all of Mica's health issues, and he would page through it at times as part of his manipulation and controlling the narrative around his wife.
All of her health issues. I assume this is mental health issues.
Yeah.
Every time he led her to
Mhm.
just lose it.
Yeah. Since leaving the organization, Bernard said that he has concerns about Solid Rock's $5.59 million real estate portfolio and the inner workings of the church that were kept from him despite him holding a position in leadership. Kennerson had a sit-down interview with News 13 where he said, quote, "Your only option if there was a problem, especially a problem with him," meaning John Paul, "the only option you had was to leave, and to leave quietly," end quote. Now, full disclosure, Bernard Kennerson had some skeletons in his own closet, including the fact that he is a registered sex offender. Kennerson was convicted of indecent acts with another in March 1991 when he was in the Army, and further investigation revealed that he was found guilty of the sexual assault of a child.
Oh, gosh.
According to Kennerson, under South Carolina law, he's been eligible to be released from the registry since 2021, but said he has had difficulty gathering all of the necessary paperwork.
I don't know that that's a thing.
Well, two things here. First of all, I asked my husband, I was like, if
Is
you
that true?
sexually abuse a child, can you get off the registry? And of course, without details, he wasn't able to answer my question. So that was my first thing. I thought, well, why are we letting child abusers
Yeah, I
off
didn't
the
think
registry?
that was a thing. Of course, I've never looked into it because I never thought it was a possibility.
Sure, me neither. But the second thing was, if you actually could get your name off the sexual offender
Wouldn't
registry,
you?
wouldn't you work really hard to get that paperwork?
I would think that would be top priority.
Right. I think I would be doing everything I could to get my name off of the registry if I actually was eligible to have it removed. So I don't know. And this was a leader in this church. So I just think maybe Solid Rock had some issues. Yeah. As Kennerson told the news outlet, J.P. Miller did, in fact, preach the very next morning, less than 12 hours after learning his wife died.
I think that's disturbing. I think church leadership should have been like, yeah, no. But again, it sounds like he is the leadership. That's it.
Yeah.
Buck stops with him.
Right.
It's all very flawed. I feel like this is not okay.
Now, unfortunately, I was unable to watch the full sermon as it was quickly taken off of their website and social media after receiving backlash.
Yeah, because I imagine it was weird.
Well, according to everything I've read, the sermon was unlike any other, containing moments of humor and levity. There was allegedly no indication that anything was wrong until at the very end of the sermon, JP said that instead of an altar call, he was going to make an announcement. And this is available to watch on various websites, and I've watched it several times.
Okay.
So JP told the congregation that he would like everyone to stand up so that he could make an announcement. And after the announcement, he wanted everyone to leave the church quietly and don't talk about the announcement inside the church. He then said that before he made the announcement, he wanted to make a request that everyone continue to come to church and continue to give because he was going to take a break and he didn't want to have to worry about the church. He said that his break may be a few days, maybe a few weeks. He didn't know. And then he announced that he got a call late last night that his wife had passed away. He said it was self-induced. He said that they would have a funeral at the church the following Sunday at 3 p.m. So those are some quick arrangements being made. He then asked for prayers for him and his children. And he inferred that the congregation knew that Mica wasn't well mentally and that she had troubles taking her medication. And I will tell you, it doesn't surprise me that the congregation didn't know that because though I did not see it for myself with my own eyes, I read many, many, many reports of JP using Mica's mental health issues both before, during, and after their separation and the filing of paperwork as talking about it in his sermons. So he openly talked about her struggles and used them as examples and things of that nature. At one point he talked about, people coming against him and used real life moments as examples for this. So
can I actually ask you about that? So I think we mentioned it in our podcast before. So you are the daughter of a preacher.
I am a pastor. Yes.
A pastor.
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel about that? Like, did your dad ever use you and your sister as examples or included you in the sermons?
All the time. However, it was never negative, ever. He would never get up there and tell something bad we did or anything like that. It was always heartwarming or funny things that happened. My dad brought a lot of levity. My dad's a very entertaining public speaker. So he would preach from the Bible, a scripture, but then use like a real life example that happened to him and his family. But he would never get up there and share something so intimate. He would never share our struggles or anything like that, ever. I can't imagine anybody doing that. It was always fun stuff. He even actually just did it last week because my son just had a birthday party and he goes to a private school. And in the middle of the birthday party, several of the kids, just literally in the middle of the birthday party before cake, bust out into a hymn, and they all start singing this hymn, and it's like one of those old hymns. It was really like a touching moment that really made my dad feel good. And he talked about that in his sermon that weekend, just saying, I feel really good about where my grandson is going to school because that told me a lot that these sweet little children just started singing a hymn. So all that to say, never would he ever share anything that made us feel vulnerable or was private or anything like that. I think that's despicable. I truly do. I think it's despicable.
Well, I've had other pastors in the past that will say things like, anytime I go to include one of my family members in my sermon, I always ask their permission. I say, this is what I'm going to share. Is this okay with you? And I think that's the respectful way to do it. Of course, I think that's natural to share your personal experience, your personal struggle, what's happening in your family. It's very relatable. And I feel like that's the community part of a church,
right?
Is to share what's going on, but also to know their life is separate than yours,
right?
As the speaker,
right?
Their life is separate than yours. Their life is not for you to use as material,
right?
But I feel if you're going to share something about a loved one and it's negative, I'm with you. I feel like the word despicable is what comes up in my mind.
I mean, it would be like us talking about something personal that we're like our husbands are going through or our children are going through on this platform. Like, how?
That's not loving.
I could never.
That's not kind. It's not loving. And I think that's where it all comes down to. I mean, I think we kind of got caught in the weeds of like criminal records and this and that. The fact of the matter is there was not a lot of just love of goodness, love of kindness, love of fruitfulness that was happening in this church. They've got problems.
Now, Bernard Kinnerson wasn't the only person close to JP who had concerns in the days following Mica's death. Allison Williams, JP's first wife, asked a judge to temporarily grant her sole custody of their two youngest children with all contact suspended until John Paul completed a psychological and parental fitness exam. She said initially she was okay with phone calls and text messages. However, when her children were recently texting with JP, he had inappropriately discussed the current state of events with them and shared his plans to sue everyone and become a millionaire.
What? Okay.
In her custody filing, Allison described John Paul's infidelities during her own marriage to him, including the affair with Mica, as well as allegations that John Paul had a history of being sexually inappropriate with several underage female members of his congregation.
Ooh, no!
And she said he regularly hired prostitutes.
Oh my gosh. How is this happening?
I told you. Going into this, I've been, for weeks, I've been saying, Stephanie, I'm really struggling with this one. It makes me so angry. Do you see what
and the fact that this guy's so respected and has a position of power.
It's sickening. Allison claimed the underage girls had given her detailed accounts of his actions, but none of them wanted to come forward because they feared retaliation, which
sucks too.
But, when you're talking about underage girls coming in and talking about what some man did to them, I totally get it.
Of course.
Allison also alleged that at some point, John Paul rewrote the church's bylaws to give himself 100% decision-making authority, saying as a result, nearly the entire congregation left the church, and JP began his quest to recruit new members and operate Solid Rock Ministries solely at his discretion.
He's like the new version of Henry VIII. If he could have had Micah beheaded, he probably would have.
Oh, he would have.
Gosh.
Allison also alleged that during his marriage to Mica, JP began a sexual relationship with another woman, Susie Skinner, and only 2 weeks prior to his own death, this woman's husband confronted JP and asked him to leave his wife and children alone. We're going to talk more about that in a minute.
Okay. This is sushi-eating Susie Skinner.
You got it. Sushi-eating Susie. Allison said that she and Mica spoke as Mica had come to her for guidance and counseling while navigating the eventual dissolution of her marriage to John Paul, and Allison was able to provide an undated voicemail message that Mica had left for her. And in the voicemail, Mica says, "Hey, Allie, it's Mica. This is my new number. Please don't give it to anybody, but I just wanted to see who your counselor was to help you walk through for forgiveness and stuff and keep your heart right through all the mess. I don't want to lose myself in this, and I don't want to pursue anything out of anger or vengeance. I just want to be free and have peace and keep my soul right. So if you just text me the name of a good counselor, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks. Bye." Which, to me, that voicemail really says a lot about her heart.
It does. And very relatable.
Right. All right, let's talk about Susie Skinner.
Sushi Susie.
That's right, Susie. Oh, I can't even say that.
The alliteration caught me from the very beginning.
Susie Skinner had been socializing with JP since Mica's death, and as I mentioned previously, several people have come forward saying it was well known that JP and Susie had been having an affair since 2021.
That's Susie.
Susie had been married to a man named Christopher Stephen Skinner, who was wheelchair-bound following a drunk driving accident in 2000. Christopher traveled the country as an inspirational speaker and the author of a book titled The Ultimate Learning Experience that told his story. And when Christopher and Susie moved to Myrtle Beach, they joined Solid Rock Ministries. In 2020, Christopher's story went viral when celebrities joined efforts to raise funds to purchase a new all-terrain wheelchair that would allow him to be more active and enjoy the beach with his wife, Susie, and their twins. And I actually feel like I kind of remember seeing that back in 2020 or a story similar to that.
Yeah, it was a wild time, but I'm sure it was all in there.
The following year, 2021, the year JP and Susie allegedly began their affair, 41-year-old Christopher drowned at a community pool when his wheelchair went into the pool and he became trapped underneath it.
I do remember this. Oh my gosh, I had no idea these were related. And also, that was a horrible tragedy.
Horrible tragedy. Now, earlier that morning, Christopher had asked a neighbor to unlock the pool gate and let him in as he was expecting to meet someone to play chess. Surveillance cameras show Christopher driving his wheelchair around the pool, and he comes to a little curve in the pool, and then the wheelchair just goes straight into the pool. His chess partner was never seen on surveillance footage, and no one else was ever caught on surveillance footage at this time. According to Allison, Christopher had confronted JP, telling him to leave his wife and children alone only 2 weeks prior. Pastor John Paul Miller delivered the message at Christopher's funeral.
I'm just getting all the gross feels. Like, literally, I'm getting like this nasty feeling in my stomach. I'm getting weird chills. Just feel like this is not, I don't know. I don't feel good about any of this that's going on right now.
It's another suspicious death around JP. Now, I did not search for this video. I don't even know if it's available to to be seen for the public, but I didn't want to search for
I don't
it
want
because
to.
I didn't want to watch it.
Anyway. That's horrible.
But, according to all the reports, you can see that Christopher was alone. And, it appears that this was either an accident.
So, like, the motorized wheelchair malfunctioned would be the idea?
Well,
or this was a suicide.
Correct.
Okay.
I think a lot of people believe this was a suicide because he was upset, maybe after learning that his wife was having an affair.
Okay.
Of course, before I really dove in, I was like, oh, he was murdered. They drove him into the pool to get rid of him so they could, you know. And then a couple of years later, JP's wife is murdered, and now they're together. That's where my mind went. But that is not the case. After doing my research, this was caught on video. Nobody pushed this man into the pool.
However, they are related in this very strange web of events.
It's just another strange, mysterious death. Could it have been an accident? Yes. Could it have been suicide? Yes.
Got it.
But I do find it interesting that the chess partner was never seen showing up. It was like an hour later when he was found. He was actually found by women who were there to do a water aerobics class. So I don't know what happened there.
And that could have been an excuse to get to the pool.
Exactly. That's kind of
like he made up the chess player.
Right.
Yeah.
That's where my
So
mind
it's not
goes.
necessarily, well, originally my mind was like, oh, so was it somebody that said they were going to meet him there, but they weren't really going to be there? Or it was the guys of chess, but you're saying he possibly made up the chess story.
My mind thinks he maybe made up the chess story as an excuse as to why his friend should unlock the pool for him so he could go there.
Right.
Mica's family reached a settlement with JP 3 months after Mica's death. The terms of the settlement are sealed under a confidentiality agreement, but both legal teams reportedly told the judge they had agreed that Mica Miller's sister, Sierra Francis, would dismiss her request to be the personal representative of Mica Miller's estate, and instead JP Miller would be the personal representative of his wife's estate. This agreement also means Mica Miller's family will not pursue any wrongful death lawsuit against JP Miller, which they were reportedly thinking of doing. JP's attorney said, quote, "Those that have spent every Sunday morning protesting outside of Solid Rock Church, chanting justice for Mica, should recognize this time of healing and move on with their lives. We only ask that you remember Mica as the wonderful, beautiful soul that she was." End quote. Regina Ward, an attorney representing Mica's family in the case, told multiple news outlets, quote, "We do not want the Francis family or anyone to be dragged through litigation for years. I know that some of you are going to be disappointed. We want to put this behind us and move on to the next chapter that matters. When we say that we've gotten justice for Mica as a result of this settlement, it is true." End quote.
Okay. I have mixed feelings on this.
As far as the public has been made aware, this is where things landed. And to our knowledge, nothing more has really happened in the case. Until...
Yeah, like this week.
This last Friday, November 1st, 2024, the FBI conducted a, quote, court-authorized law enforcement activity, end quote, at the Myrtle Beach home of John Paul Miller. It has been reported that 25 FBI agents were at the home wearing evidence response team uniforms to execute a search warrant. And I read an article that's saying they were taking things like, computers, things like that. The agents first arrived in multiple black Suburbans along with local law enforcement between 10 and 10:30 a.m. on November 1st, but allegedly JP was not home at the time. Neighbors told the authorities that JP was not home because when the authorities got there, they were saying, "Come out with your hands up, we're armed," which I asked my husband, again, who's in law enforcement, is that typical? When you're doing a search warrant, do you surround the house and draw guns and say, "Get out"? I always thought it was like a knock on your door. And he said, no, that can be typical. So that didn't necessarily tell us anything about what they were looking for. I was trying to just figure out if we could.
Right. Suss out what they were.
What was going on. But he said that can be extremely typical.
Okay.
So tells us nothing. But
the fact 25 FBI agents, like this is a big deal.
A big deal. And a source close to the investigation told news outlets that the primary investigation is into events that happened before Mica died and cited allegations of interstate domestic violence.
And I don't know if this is true. There was an anonymous video posted on one of my true crime Facebook pages that showed Mica's family there as well.
Oh, I didn't see that in anything I read.
I don't know if it's confirmed, so I don't want to be part of a rumor mill, but I'm just saying, I think they said that her family might have been involved too. So I don't know. Well, I assume more information will come out later.
I think we're going to be doing an update on this case sometime, hopefully in the near future. To me, again, I don't really know, but based on all the research I've done, I feel like JP is into some stuff. And I feel like we're going to be learning a lot more about JP.
You know what? I would be fine if he winds up going to jail for something else. I think I'd be okay with that. I mean, I would be shocked to find out there's not some like embezzlement or some hiding of monies like from the church and things like that. I would be shocked if there isn't something going on
He's
in
just
that
a
vein.
bad guy. He's just a bad guy.
And just feels like he's entitled. Very entitled. And so I see how he would be. And again, if the buck stopped with him in the church, he could be doing whatever he wanted with that money.
We talk about a lot of bad guys here, right? This one really bothered me. And I think it's because, especially as a pastor's daughter, as we've discussed, we are all human. We all fall short. We all make mistakes. So this isn't me being upset that a pastor made a mistake, because that happens. This is someone who did not just make a mistake and then repent and then go and sin no more.
Right.
This is someone who built his home in a place of destruction. Everywhere he goes, he's hurting people. He's bringing destruction. I mean, we can see just from his behavior, you know, the way he spoke to Mica, the way he texted her, the way he threatened her family, the way he posted nude photos of her. None of that is good, let alone Christ-like. But for a man to stand up there and claim to be a godly person and then be so the opposite, I personally find very offensive, because I watched my family, who again is not perfect, but I watched my parents try so hard and strive so hard to do the right thing and walk the walk and talk the talk, really live by what they preached. And I find it really offensive when someone else is just so blatantly evil while pretending to be a godly person. It's offensive to me.
I can see that. I mean, in no part is he walking in love, walking in light, walking in kindness.
No.
But instead, like you said, leaving a path of destruction.
Right. So regardless what you're...
Tearing apart families.
Right.
His own.
Right.
His own family. Other people's families.
Right.
It's really devastating.
It's awful. Regardless of, you know, you may not even be a religious person. I think we can all agree he just hurt. He just hurt people.
He hurt people.
He hurt
right.
people.
And to do it in a position where you're supposed to be teaching kindness.
Right.
I think that's, like you said, it's offensive.
I find it very offensive. Like, so I really, really struggled with it. At least some of these other bad guys just come out and say, you know what, I'm a bad guy.
Right.
And I have more respect for them than I do this person.
It's the proverbial wolf in sheep's clothing.
It's bad. It's bad. The biggest tragedy here is that Mica, who was a vibrant person from everything I could see, I watched her videos, I listened to her sing, she had a beautiful voice. She actually did exude love and kindness.
Was at least trying to be that.
Well, even the voicemail that she left, you know, the ex-wife who said that despite the fact that Mica had an affair with Allison's husband, they still remained close and friendly, which I think says a lot about both of them.
Yeah.
And the fact that, you know, Mica went to her and said, I want to get through this. I don't want this to affect who I am. I don't want to be hateful. I don't want to have resentment. To me, it just says so much.
And admitting she's struggling. I think that says a lot about a person too, to admit when you're not feeling confident, where you don't know where to turn and you're looking for other people with wisdom.
Right. So the fact that we lost this person who I think actually had so much light to give to the world is such a huge tragedy. And if you, one of our listeners, find yourself in a place where you're questioning whether or not you should stick around, please know that you're loved and that you make a difference. And there are people out there that you could reach out to and talk to. If you're struggling with suicidal thoughts, you can dial the 24/7 National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 988 or go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. And being the first episode of the month, this is our Branch of Hope episode for the month of November 2024. And 988 Lifeline is the featured organization as this month's Branch of Hope recipient. Evidence shows that providing support services, talking about suicide, reducing access to means of self-harm, and following up with loved ones are just some of the actions we can all take to help others. 988 Lifeline has counselors available 24/7 via telephone, text, online chat, and deaf and hard of hearing services. So if you are part of our Patreon, you can feel good knowing that a portion of our proceeds from your membership will be given directly to 988 Lifeline. And if you would like to give to that organization directly, you can go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org.
And I think this is such an important message at this time of the year as well. We know we're getting towards the end of the year with the holidays, which are hard if you're separated from your family, if there is family trauma. This is a difficult time. I think this is such a great reminder that we're all important, and a loss of a life has a ripple effect. It touches other people. You're not alone.
You're not alone.
Well, Cynthia, thank you for shedding more light on Mica's life. I want to focus more on her, less on JP. However, I do want an update on what we find out. What's going on this week?
Oh, I'll bring it as soon as I know something.
Yeah.
I will bring it. We will talk about it. If our listeners know anything, because like all the neighbors in the area were camped out outside. And, so if you're from the Myrtle Beach area,
You know what?
if you know anything about this church, if you ever
Yes.
visited this church, if you know anything.
You know what? Let's open a little thread on our social media. If you know anything or you know of anyone, let us know. We want the deets.
We do.
Okay.
All right.
Well, Cynthia, this was, great.
It was a doozy. It was a doozy.
All right. What else can we share? If you want to get in touch with us, you can reach out to us at thedarkoakpodcast@gmail.com. We've, of course, got all the socials. You can follow us there. Join us at our Patreon. We've been having some fun sharing some little personal photos of us and things that are going on over there.
And we just uploaded our November Patreon episode.
Yeah.
So that's fun. So head over to Patreon. We're having a lot of fun over there.
Yeah. And thanks for joining us, Shiver Seekers. We will be with you again next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
This episode of The Dark Oak was created, researched, written, recorded, hosted, edited, published, and marketed by Cynthia and Stephanie of Just Us Gals Productions, and made possible by you, our shiver-seeking listener. Special thanks goes to Justice Himes for our incredible artwork and Ryan Crete for our amazing music.